Hey everybody, thanks for attending Dance Music Initiative's first class for Make Music Day 2021. Just want to introduce myself. My name is Brian Chang. I'm here to teach you a little bit about the psychology of a DJ. First, I want to introduce a little bit about our organization. It's called Dance Music Initiative. We're a 501c nonprofit. We're based out in California, and our mission is to collectively inspire creativity through dance music culture. And the ways that we do that is that we offer various programs for the community. Our main program is that we do free DJ lessons, and typically on a weekly basis we teach people how to DJ on real equipment, and we do this every week. And we have volunteers who bring in their equipment and share all the hardware involved and the techniques and the fundamentals, and we do all this for free because we really love the art form and we're really passionate about it. We definitely had to take a little break during the pandemic doing in-person stuff, but we definitely want to resume these classes very, very soon. Another one of our programs that we do is we've expanded our offerings to middle schools. And so Dance Music Initiative has been invited to teach in the Santa Ana School District here in California. And we teach kids during their after-school programs. We've been teaching since 2018. Over the past 3 school years, we're going into our 4th school year, and the response has been great. The kids love it. It's a way for them to get hands-on, and it's the first time they're touching records. So that's pretty cool, and they really like how tactile it is to learn. And you might know that kids respond better with more hands-on tactile learning. So this is a pretty cool opportunity for them to learn about music and about DJing. And the cool thing for these kids is that DJing could be something that they pursue creatively. It could be something that they, express themselves as artists or share music with other people. But it can also be a business, right? It could also be something that they take on, like a side hustle or a way to make a little bit extra money. So this is a good opportunity for them. And then this program is free to both the students and the parents. Dance Music Initiative is helped out through an organization called Active Learning, which teaches dance to students, and they help fund and bring us out to teach these classes. So thank you so much to Active Learning for doing that over the past several years. Some other things that we do through our class is we have kind of like a driver's test for the students. So if the students demonstrate proficiency in the material that we've taught them, and they can pretty much go on their own and mix songs, then they take what we call our intro test, and once they pass the intro test, then those students are eligible to be booked at various Dance Music Initiative gigs. We have connections through local clubs in the area. Sometimes we host our own events. We do underground events. We have access to nonprofit radio through KX Laguna Beach. There's lots of different avenues for them to kind of cut their teeth and to get out there in front of a crowd, and we help make those first gig experiences possible once they've proven themselves and they demonstrate that they understand all the fundamentals. And then we've also hosted our own events, whether they be at clubs or underground parties. Underground meaning like sometimes we'll rent out like an industrial space and we'll throw a little private party there, and those are actually a lot of fun. It has closer roots to where the whole dance music culture evolved out of. So we like to do events that are very true to the culture of dance music. So a little bit more about myself. So I'm the founder and executive director of Dance Music Initiative. I founded DMI in 2016 after several years of kind of informally running the group. I've taught weekly free DJ lessons for quite some time, and then at one point I just figured, hey, this would be a good thing to kind of make official and to set up a nonprofit around it. So once we became a nonprofit, that opened up doors to get into schools and other opportunities. So it's definitely been a good move for us. The focus has always been the same. It's always been about the fundamentals and the history and culture of DJing. We definitely approach it more from a typical class kind of structure versus just like, hey, you do what I do kind of thing. I like to really give a background on all the different pieces. So over those roughly about 11 years that we've been teaching both informally and formally as a nonprofit, I've probably taught at least 1,000 people how to DJ. Through that, I've developed a pretty solid curriculum that goes over all the materials. It's something that I definitely want to get out there and share with more people. As far as my experience as an artist and performer, I've played various gigs here in the Southern California area. done mobile gigs like weddings and corporate events as well on top of that. Definitely a bunch of hands-on experience in addition to my teaching. A lot of the advice that you'll learn in this class about the psychology of a DJ comes from a place of experience and actually doing it versus it being all theory. All right, so these are the topics that I plan on covering today. At a very high level, the role of a DJ. What does a DJ do? What is their job? And then followed by a little bit of the history of music in its like physical form, right? The recordings, the media that it's printed on. A lot of that influences how people have DJed over the years and how it's changed. And then we'll move on into selection. And what I mean by selection is it's how DJs decide in the moment what is the right song for the dance floor. And there's lots of different things to consider that we'll cover there. Then we move on into the dance floor itself, and that could mean the event where the party is taking place. It could be the venue, the time of year that's happening. There's lots of different factors that go into an event. Let's say like a wedding or Christmas party will look very different from your average Friday night club night or your underground warehouse party. It affects what songs you play and how you play them and in what order you play them. So that's something we'll dive into on the dance floor section. And lastly, we'll wrap it all up with reading the room. And reading the room is basically responding live to your audience and seeing, are the songs that the DJ is playing, are they landing? Are they resonating with the audience? Are they, not into it? And if they're not into it, then as a DJ, you need to be flexible and you need to switch it up. So you need to read the language of the room, either in their body language or how much they're dancing or what they're doing, how they're socializing. Those things will become apparent, and I'll give you some tips on that. All right, so starting off with the role of a DJ, basically the main question to ask is, what does a DJ do? I think at very face value, a DJ plays music. Usually it's dance music, but it doesn't always have to be dance music for an audience of people. And that audience of people is usually celebrating something or blowing off some steam, having a good time generally, but there's all different kinds of places and situations you can DJ. So we'll get into some of the specifics later. But one way that I like to summarize what a DJ does is they're basically the musical captain of the party ship. They're at the helm. They're providing the atmosphere and the vibe of the party or the event, and they're taking the audience on a journey. They're taking them through different emotions and vibes and ups and downs and captaining that ship. So that's kind of one way to look at it. But historically, and then this is kind of alluding back to that image that I just showed previously, is that the DJ plays a cultural role. Cultural meaning they were a storyteller. Imagine before DJ gear and before records and before speakers and stuff, you had a group of people in their village. They were all gathered around a campfire. Maybe they just finished their meal, and this orator of the group sharing the stories of the ancestors and stuff like that. Maybe they have a drum with them, or they share spiritual moments, or they go into a trance and stuff like that. All these kind of cultural beginnings is kind of inspiration behind what a DJ does, and where they take a message or they take a vibe and they share it with the group. For part of it is education, part of it is storytelling, some of it is historical. There's lots of different ways that DJs kind of approach that. Much later on, DJs evolved more into tastemakers, and tastemakers really became commonplace and can reach a lot more people by being on the radio. Radio was a way to broadcast music to the masses. This showed up, late 1800s, early 1900s is when it started picking up steam. And you would have your radio disc jockey, and they're not necessarily playing music only for a dance floor. Sometimes they're playing, just songs back to back. Sometimes they pick songs that they're paid to play via the record labels or whatever's cool and hot at the time in order to build recognition and popularity with the radio station. But why you put a person in that role is they're bringing their personal taste. They're bringing what they think is good and sharing that with other people. So yeah, it's all about song selection and establishing trends and trying to kick that off. So that's how the selection takes place. Sometimes they curate, sometimes they come up with a certain sound of a venue or an event, and they give it style, they give it a theme, or maybe they build consistency from events. So when you go to a certain place, you kind of have an idea of what you're getting. And if people like that sound, they're more likely to go again. It plays into the business. It's part marketing, it's part branding. Basically, tastemakers share the good stuff. Now we move into more about events with dance floors, or parties, or soundtracks to movies. This DJ role is basically trying to create a vibe within any of these events. So sometimes it's to hype the crowd up, right? To get them excited to dance. Sometimes it's creating something that complements what else is happening. If you are DJing, let's say, a dinner, you probably don't want pumping beats throughout dinner, right? You want something a little bit more relaxed, for example. Or let's say you're the sound supervisor on a movie and you're putting together the soundtrack. You want to pick songs that match what's going on screen, or that complements the story, or non-verbally lets you into the head of the main character. It's all about setting that vibe. You put music to these events to bring that unspoken emotion to the forefront. Next, cover a little bit about the recordings of music. It's important to understand how music in its physical form or recorded form came about, because it definitely affects how the music is played. And it's good to have that context, just a little bit of history and culture behind the music. The big way that music has changed over time, at least in its replayed format instead of its live format, because DJs mainly deal with replayed music, is that we had a shift from physical media to digital media. And digital media came about closer to like the mid-90s. So it's a relatively new thing, this evolution. But physical media came out much earlier, and we'll get into some of those specifics. And the first recorded sound ever was recorded by famous inventor Thomas Edison. He did lots of amazing things like the light bulb and worked with electricity and other many inventions. Well, one of them was the phonograph. This was the first time that sound was ever recorded. And he did this in 1877. So it's already been almost 150 years since we've been able to record and replay sounds. And the way he figured out how to do it was he built this device, kind of like a phonograph or like a gramophone, which you speak into the big part of a cone. And when you speak into the cone, it funnels the sound to a point. And at the end of the point, you have a tiny little hammer that carves out the sound waves into a rotating piece of tinfoil. And so the tinfoil would get etched into it, the sounds. And then he figured out if he plays back the little etchings on the tinfoil, it would play back simple sounds like voice and anything that was spoken into or went into that funnel. So that was the start of this. Before 1877, there was obviously music, right? A lot of the classical music and classic composers, Bach, Mozart, and so forth, they were playing music and they were composing music, and music was being performed, but it was always a live experience. Live music was something that was not very common in everyday life. You would have to go see an orchestra, or you would have to play in a band live with friends, and then you need access to these instruments. And so that means like anything more complicated than very simplistic instruments like percussive instruments meant you had to have money, or meant you had to have access to, nice things. So music was definitely a very cultured and fancy thing back in the day. Nowadays, music is everywhere we go. Music is played in the grocery store when we're shopping. Music is, out and about. It's in our cars. It's in our phones, in our pocket. It's everywhere. And now, through these recordings, we can select which recordings are the most appropriate for any one point in time. And that's what DJs consider, right? What is the perfect vibe for any one moment? So once the technology was there, then it started to evolve. And it took a little bit of time for it to get from that tinfoil to say records. Records were printed initially on like a shellac material. This is pre-vinyl. It's a lot more brittle. It wasn't as precise. It was not as easy to produce. And so around 1930, they kind of refined that and they started mass producing records in its 78 RPM format. And RPMs just stand for revolutions per minute. That just describes how fast the record spins for it to play back properly. And so that was the initial records. They looked like records, but they kind of were different feeling than modern day records. So that's where the 33 and the 45 RPM records came out. And those were printed on vinyl material. Vinyl is a little bit more durable. It doesn't shatter as easily. You can also, with better machinery, you can carve out much more music on a vinyl record than you could on a shellac 78 RPM record. Around the 50s is when music started really taking off and being mass produced, and at that point music became a business. Music became an industry, no longer just a live performance thing or an art form. So now you have artists working with record labels and getting their music heard around the world through radio and promoted by radio DJs at the time. The two primary formats for that was the LP, which stands for long play, and those were printed at 33 and a third RPMs. And then you also had the singles, which are the much smaller records, which were 7 inches, and they usually only held one song on them. And those are the singles, or the 45s is what they were called. Back in the day, you would need a separate record player for full 12-inch LPs versus 45s because of the different speed. And then when DJing kind of took hold, you would need to be able to play either or, so you had DJ players that could switch between the two modes. The 45s were pretty influential because of their smaller size and their focus on singles, meaning the hits. That was a way for records to be automated. And you think, how is this automation and how is this taking place in the 50s? Well, it was through jukeboxes in diners. Back in the day, you'd put in your nickel or whatever, and you would select the song, and a little robot arm would find the disc of the one you picked, put it on the record player inside the jukebox machine, and start playing it. So this was kind of the beginnings of DJs before you had live people doing it. So this is another kind of form of DJing that the patrons or the audience gets to participate in, which is kind of cool. Then moving on from records, it slowly evolved into cassettes. If you remember, cassettes had magnetic tape that had the music recorded, and cassettes were easier because it was easier to seek and rewind than manually moving the needle on a record. This became the new way music started getting distributed, and believe it or not, there are DJs who used to DJ cassettes back in the day. They used to wind and rewind the tape live to kind of create blends between two tracks. And then shortly after that, we had CDs. CDs came about, I think, in the late 80s, and this was an even better technology than cassettes, because CDs are very durable. They don't wear out like cassettes do, and it's also digital music, so the recording quality became higher. And then there was a big change in the DJ world too, when DJs moved from records to CDJs. And actually, a lot of DJs today still perform on CDJs. They're not actually using CDs anymore, they're using USB sticks, but it's pretty much the same concept, just a different media. And that's how most of the big DJ sets that you hear today are all played on CDJs or using digital media. Around 1994 is when the internet was brand new and we started moving towards digital media. So now we don't have to buy physical things anymore, and this is how it can live in our phone, right? It gets distributed electronically through the internet. The music is either uncompressed or compressed, depending on the quality and the space of your hard drive and stuff like that. But the basic summary is that music is now intangible. It's just there and it's everywhere. And you can have the world's library of music, everything at your fingertips or in your pocket or whatever. You no longer have to lug records with you to gigs. You're no longer bound by physical space. You're just bound by hard drive space, and hard drive space today is so plentiful. It's really almost a non-issue. So instead of picking and choosing, let's say 100 to 200 records for your next gig or event, now you bring your USB stick that has thousands of songs on it, or maybe you bring your laptop that has tens of thousands of songs on it, and you would have everything you would ever need to handle any situation. When it was limited by physical media, the DJ would have to really pick and choose and know a lot about the event that they're going to be spinning at prior, because you have to take some guesses, or you have to do your research of like, what do I think they're going to be into? What songs work for what situations? So a lot more planning went into old DJ sets versus now DJs can respond with anything. They can take a lot more requests than they used to be able to. There could be surprises during the event, and they can handle it. So that's one way that DJing has changed through its shift and evolution from analog to digital. That leads us into the next topic, is how are DJs selecting their tracks? What's going to work at any one moment? And it's all based on them being kind of this music librarian, this ability to fit the music to the vibe on the fly. And so one of the questions I like to ask my class is, what do you think is the most important aspect of music to get people to dance? What about music makes it danceable? The most common responses that I get from most people when I ask this question is either beats or rhythm. And these make perfect sense. These are very, very important parts of music to make music danceable. So let's talk about each one. So beats, right? Beats is your drum beat. It's your kick drum. It's your duh, 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 duh. It sets the pace. It tells you where to put your feet, right? Because most people dance to the beat, and so they march or they move along with the beats. So yes, 100%, beats is extremely important aspect of music to get people to dance, but I would argue that it's not the most important. The second answer that I most commonly get is rhythm. And so what is rhythm? Rhythm is usually a pattern, a repeated section, a collection of beats. So let's say if a beat is a single duh, and rhythm is, say, over like a bar of music, right? Like a 1, 2, 3, 4, a 4 count. And if you take that 4 count and you repeat it over and over again, okay, well now you have a danceable rhythm. Now you have a flow that can go like duh, 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 duh. But those two things alone are probably, I would say, probably the second and third most important aspect of music to make it danceable. I'm going to give you an example as to why those two are not enough. So I'm going to make up a song on the spot. And my song is going to have beats and rhythm in it. But it's not going to be very danceable. So here's my song. It goes da, 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 ba, 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 ba. That song had beats in it. And if I take that section of song and I repeat it 1,000 times, okay, well now there is technically rhythm in it, but that song is going to be really, really hard to dance to. It's something that people might start, but then they might get lost along the way. It's kind of long. It's kind of like a long pattern. It's kind of confusing. And so that's why I would argue that beats and rhythm are not all you need to get people to dance. I think that it's all about predictability. The more likely your audience, your dance floor, is able to predict when the beats are happening, the more likely they are going to be able to dance to it, because they can kind of dance to the beat, right? They know where to put their feet in time with the music. You might notice some people who quote unquote can't dance. Usually it's because they can't predict the music. They can't place their feet in time live while the music is playing. So they're always reacting to the beat, and they're always late in their dance steps. So that gives us the visual that, oh, that person doesn't know how to dance. It's because they're always responding and they're not predicting in real time. Now, zooming back out to how do DJs select music for their dance floor. They pick songs that are predictable, that have beats and rhythm and all that stuff. And then they apply this new layer to it, right? This context layer. Where are we right now? Or what kind of event is it? If it's for a club or your typical dance floor, it's very clear that you're aiming for dance music. But radio could be used for lots of different things. You could dance to it. Sometimes you're driving, sometimes you're shopping or out and about. You can be doing lots of things. And so the music that you play while shopping might sound a lot different from music while you play to diners in a restaurant, or to, let's say, people doing a workout. You want high energy stuff that paces itself over the workout. Say your workout has like a warm-up section to it, so you kind of want to ease the energy in, and then maybe there's like spurts of activity, so you might create this like journey or this graph of energy where it goes up and it comes down, it goes up, it comes down, right? And maybe there's like a really peak point of the workout routine where it goes like super high energy, and then maybe at the tail end of the workout there's a cool down, right? Because to give your heart a rest. And so selection that goes along these very specific timed stories or events really need to be carefully selected. Same thing with the soundtrack of a movie. At different points of the movie, there are different moments, right? Your climax, your suspense, your denouement, all these different parts of the movie should have music that matches. So it's really important to understand where you're playing the music, in what context and what situation. The next thing is culture. So culture plays a big role in the predictability side of music. Generally, if you want to appeal to a certain audience, you want to play music that they've heard before, that they grew up with, that is a part of their identity. If you play music that speaks to them, or that is familiar or friendly, they're gonna go along with it much easier, right? If you play a certain genre of music that doesn't match the vibe of the crowd or doesn't match their upbringing, they might have a harder time dancing to it or getting into it because it's foreign to them. You might see someone at a hip-hop club not really know what to do, but you take that same person and throw them into like an electronic music club and they can dance to it. It doesn't mean that they're a bad dancer, they're just not used to it. So knowing their culture and what you think they've heard before is an important part of selecting music. And then genres of music play a big role, because a genre of music is a way we artistically group different kinds of music together. Example genres are, there's country, there's rock, there's hip hop, there's electronic, there's classical, jazz, right? All these different genres have different sounds or similarities between the tracks. And so if you know the genre of your audience that they're into and you stick to that genre, you're going to have a much more successful time of speaking to that crowd than saying the jumping around and playing a little bit of everything. And that might be kind of rolling the dice at that point. Also, certain venues or events might be known for a particular genre. It's like, this is a hip hop club. This is a house club. This is a drum and bass club. People know that going in and have that expectation. So when you deliver upon that expectation, they're going to have a better time and they're going to be able to probably be dancing a lot more. So knowing the different genres are important. I know a lot of people like to really separate music into like many different subgenres and stuff like that. And, that's fun. It's cool to think about music that way. But there's a lot like more general, bigger buckets to group music into that you kind of start to pick up the more you listen to different kinds of music. That's a way you can listen to a song you've never heard before and be able to identify the genre of it. Let's take like reggae, for example. Reggae has a very signature bump, 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 like tone or guitar strum on the upbeat. It's just happens to be in most reggae. Hip hop tends to be syncopated or have a breakbeat to it. It has that little funk in that groove, and it's a little bit more hip driven, versus house music has more of a steady beat, and hip hop has more of a sway and like a groove. These characteristics help define different genres, and then there are stylistic choices on top of that help create what's known as the different genres. So now we're going to get into the dance floor. The dance floor, how I'm using it, is more to describe the physical space that you're dancing in, the venue, how big the room is. Are people like bunched up together? Or do they have room to like move around a little bit? Is it a big square? Is it seating where people are dancing in their seats kind of thing. So the question is, how does the venue affect how you DJ? And you gotta select songs that make sense for the situation. Again, to use that dining example, if you have a bunch of diners and they're eating, like say during a wedding reception, if you play pumping music at that time, it's not congruent. It doesn't really make sense with people when they're eating and they're socializing, whatever. So you play more atmospheric, maybe more ambient, softer music that doesn't have a beat that, you know, kind of gets people's heads bobbing, right? Because it's not easy to eat and bob your head at the same time. So that's like one example. You want to really look at the physical space you're in. And so taking a look at the events that you're playing at, this is more of your like mobile DJ setup where there's like these private parties and people are there to usually celebrate something. So your birthdays, your weddings, even though they're celebratory, they have different vibes, right? Weddings are way more formal. People dressed nice don't always do breakdancing moves on the floor, for example, versus, like a house party or a kickback. Those are a lot more casual. People on the couch, people hanging out in the kitchen, people like maybe dancing a little bit in the living room. Completely different vibes that call for completely different music. And then you have your more standard like establishments where people go to dance. Your clubs. Back in the day, they used to call them discotheques or discos for short. This is like the critically acclaimed historical Studio 54 was all about sharing new dance music with their local communities. And at that time, Studio 54 was based in New York. It was largely a minority and gay and lesbian community. There's lots of culture that comes into it, and with that culture and that context and the physical space of the dance floor and all the production and the lighting and everything, it starts giving you a better idea of what kind of music works. Disco music works really well at Studio 54 because it was popular at the time. It spoke to the audience. It was also kind of the beginnings of house music when disco kind of had a stigma attached to it. People back in, I think, the 70s, got tired of it because it was overplayed, and a lot of like poor quality disco got churned out because people saw it as a way to just like make a bunch of money, and the quality went down, so people started liking it less. And some of these sounds had to evolve, and disco gave birth to house music, and house music was for a way for it to kind of retain its soul and be played at some of these clubs and discos. In general, these are just your spots, your like local city spots that are places to go and dance. They're usually open just nights, and they're open maybe only on the weekends, right? And they make all their money there, and all the other days they don't need to do anything. Then there's also your underground sound, and these are like your below the radar parties, your raves, your abandoned warehouses. Sometimes people set up a bunch of stuff in the desert. These are all the ways that some of the culture was able to thrive, and people were able to really go after a certain style in their dance music by going to these events, because it wasn't all about playing commercial hits. It was a little bit more deeper than that. So you might note that going to a warehouse party or a rave or driving out to the desert, it takes a lot more work. So the people who want to be there have to jump through a lot of hoops to get there. So they're excited when they get there. They're pumped because they had to do a lot more work. So they want to have a great time. Whereas maybe at your local club where you just go because it's just down the street, you might have some people who are maybe more snobby about it, or they have this sense of like, oh, I gotta be impressed or whatever. Oh, whatever, it's just another Friday night kind of thing. Whereas, the underground party is a little bit more of an experience, and they're looking for something new, something that they haven't heard before, versus maybe at your standard club or your wedding or whatever, you just want to hear songs that you've already heard before because it's easy and comfortable. So you have different kinds of audiences attending these events. And as a DJ, when you're making your selections, you can take more risks, or you can get a little more weird at like a rave, where you can play music that no one's heard before, but as long as it's got that vibe and it's hitting the audience at the right time, at the right moment, and you've eased them into your sound, then usually it's going to land and you're going to get a great response. Whereas if you don't play like a big hit, say at some clubs or some weddings, that, you might get some weird looks. And these are things that DJs should know going into the kind of event that they're playing. What is the audience expecting? What's it going to take to get them to have fun? But let's say you were doing your wedding gig and you were playing a lot of the big hits and everything was familiar and the dance floor was going nuts and you're saying, oh my God, everyone's like, this DJ is amazing. They're playing all my favorites, whatever. Once you have them at that moment, the DJ has kind of earned the trust and they can maybe play a new song that the audience hasn't heard before, but is very stylistically similar to the songs that they've been playing. And then that's like the magic moment. That's when a DJ gets to be a true tastemaker to even your most mainstream fair weather crowds. And that's like a great feeling of being able to share your personal taste beyond what the radio like tells you should be good. You can kind of like introduce people to new things, and that's always fun. I guarantee you, if you are a DJ and you just play all the hits and that's it, only that, yeah, you'll get a good response for the night, but anyone can do that and they'll just remember the venue as being a good place to go hear music. But if you start surprising them and start introducing them to new stuff, that's when they remember you as the DJ, not just the venue or the night. Another kind of event or kind of dance floor are your concerts and festivals. And these are really popular right now. This is, you see happen in Vegas or like Coachella or EDC. And Burning Man even is still a giant festival. Even though it has much more of an underground sound to it, it's still very like above the radar kind of thing, and where people go and they experience, let's say, a lineup of DJs where every hour a new DJ switches out. So when you're in that context versus being one DJ providing the sound for the entire night, now you only have a block to tell a story. That's a much different thing to consider, and it changes how you pick your music. Now it becomes much more about time of day and pacing. So like, let's say you're playing during the day. What is a good daytime vibe? Maybe daytime vibe is a little bit more groovy and like a little, not super in your face, but like, let's say midnight to 2 a.m., that might be peak time, right? That's when your highest energy music is playing. And that's when the fireworks go off on the big production stages, or like lights are shooting everywhere. And so they want to match that intensity with the music. When you're playing during the day, just lighting doesn't come off and fireworks aren't visible. Without that extra stimulation, the energy of the music should match. One thing I want to say about concerts versus a club is that there seems to be this trend where DJs are getting booked back to back with all these other DJs, and then they're forced to play just all their big songs and keep that energy high versus maintain a vibe over time. And 1 hour is not a lot of time to tell a full story. It really changes the vibe. And also at a concert, you have everyone bunched together real tight, facing forward. Most people are just watching a show, watching a DJ wear a funny helmet, pump their fist, versus interact with the other people on the dance floor, which is what is very kind of the soul of a club experience, is interacting with people, hanging out with your friends, socializing. I guarantee you, nights where you've danced with your friends are going to be way more memorable than nights where you just watch a DJ play. It's all about that full experience. All right, moving on into our last section is reading the room. And reading the room is looking at your audience and responding live in the moment. Sometimes they even come up to the booth and ask you questions, they ask for songs and stuff like that. That's like, it's handed to you on a silver platter. But sometimes you got to kind of feel it out and see how they're reacting. One of the most common questions that I get from my students is, hey, should I plan my DJ set or should I play more off the cuff? Should I kind of like respond in the moment? And I think when you're beginning and you're just starting out, planning your set makes a lot of sense because you've got a ton of things to worry about. You just want to like focus on mixing the music. And so going in with a plan makes a lot of sense. And you can plan out what song order you want to play. You can plan that journey and that story you want to tell over time. You can even plan out exactly when you're mixing in and out of songs. You can do it to the finest level of detail. But as soon as, and that's great for beginners, but as soon as the audience doesn't respond to your thing, do you stay on that same path? Do you just power through and disregard the audience? Well, you might feel like you did okay and your art might be good, but your audience might not be receptive to it and they'll forget you, or they'll be like, oh, whatever, that DJ sucked, because you're not taking care of them. Remember, you're the music captain of the party ship, so you need to guide them. It's not you just playing in a vacuum. It's not you playing to entertain yourself. You're entertaining others. You're hired to do a job. So it's important for you to adjust. So learning how to make those changes is important. So having a plan is very important, right? But don't be afraid to go off the rails a little bit if the audience is not quite what you anticipated, if your plan wasn't perfect to begin with. So some things that go into the plan is knowing at what point of the night you're playing. Like, let's say you're playing a club and they have like 3 or 4 DJs for the night. Are you the opener? Are you the music that people are playing when the doors open and people walking in and the dance floor is empty? What does that sound like? If you start playing heavy peak time music during that time, people are going to be like, whoa, this is too intense. I just got here. I'm just going to hang out at the bar for a while. Or do you lure them in by playing welcoming music, like something that's easy and adjusts? Also, people's ears need to adjust a bit too. And then the warm-up is like the headliner support to get into that vibe on the way to usually the headliner, which people bought their tickets to go see. Peak time is usually the headliner. And this, maybe 12 a.m. to 2 a.m., give or take. It depends on where you're at. Sometimes the venues close at 2 a.m. It's last call at 2 a.m. and they close down, and that's where the night ends. Sometimes nights go to 4 a.m., 5 a.m. Sometimes they go to 8 a.m. or the next day. Those are like the closer sets, and they have to ride that vibe, but usually it tapers down a little bit over the course of the night. So knowing where you're playing in the night is going to help you plan. Looking at the demographics of your dance floor is really going to help clue into what kind of music they might like. So you're actually reading their style, their age, their race, their gender, and stuff like that. So, a lot of this is stereotypes, but a lot of them work. So you can kind of make guesses on what kind of music the audience might like based on the way they appear or the way they dress. One thing that you can do in order to plan out your music is to do your research on the venue. Go on a similar night like a week ahead. See what kind of crowd's there. That's going to make it easier for you when it's your turn to come and prepare and already have an idea, because you've been there, you've done your research, you've looked at the people, you've maybe talked to them, socialized a little bit. So that's going to help you pick out music. And then here's an important thing is you definitely need to give your dancers a break every now and then. If you're like at 100 miles per hour the entire time, people get tired and you're just going to lose them after a while, right? It's better to like create these like lull moments and low energy moments, so when you bring it back, it hits that much harder and it creates these like big drops and these big like explosions. So that's going to be really important in order to kind of like keep your audience there and have them not wear themselves out by midnight. You want them there the whole time. The venue wants them there the whole time because that's how they make money. If you create a dip in your energy, that might be a cue for your dancers to go back to the bar or to go take a smoke break or whatever. And then when they hear the music's pumping and later on, they all come flooding back, burn off all that energy, get thirsty again, and go back to the bar. That's the economics side of DJing. But you need to create these like ups and downs, captain that party ship, kind of guide them throughout what's going on over the course of the night. That's basically everything in my lesson about the psychology of DJ. If you're interested in learning more from us, there's lots of ways to get involved. We will be resuming our weekly free DJ classes. We've taken a break due to the pandemic. We were no longer hosting in-person classes, but we're going to get those kicked off pretty soon again. I'm available to be booked for private lessons. It's even possible to start your own local DMI chapter in your own city if you're not here local with us in Orange County in Southern California. Some other resources out there. We've got a YouTube. Just search and subscribe to Dance Music Initiative. We've got a Facebook group where we do most of our communication of all of our events. We let people know what's happening and where it's happening. And this is where we also advertise our free DJ classes through Facebook. But the easiest way to follow us is just to reach out. Just email us at contact@dancemusicinitiative.org. I'll personally respond, give you some tips of like how to get started. And we have lots of resources available, as well as maybe attending one of our in-person events. That concludes everything for our first lesson of the music lesson marathon. So just want to thank you. My name is DJ BChang. Thank you so much. I really appreciate you joining us. And thank you again to Make Music Day for having us. Till next time.